Welcome back to the Shadow Dossier. We are taught that the history of the American Southwest begins with a failure. We are told that in 1540, the Spanish conquistador Francisco Vázquez de Coronado led a massive expedition north from Mexico, searching for the legendary 7 cities of gold, Cibola. We are told he marched for 2 years across the deserts of Arizona and the plains of Kansas, finding only mud huts, poverty, and endless grass. He returned to Mexico City bankrupt, broken, and disgraced, having found absolutely nothing of value. This is the history of the surface. It is a cover story that has held for nearly 500 years. The Shadow Dossier reveals that Coronado did not fail. He found exactly what he was looking for. He found Cibola. But Cibola was not a city of gold coins and jewelry. It was a city of golden energy. It was a technological complex buried deep within the earth, pulsating with a power that could reshape reality. Coronado found the location, but he also found the reason why no one had ever returned to speak of it. He found the Black Canyon, and he found the guardians who keep the river flowing. The year is 1540. The expedition is a moving city of iron and cloth. 300 Spaniards, 1,000 indigenous allies, and thousands of livestock are cutting a scar through the high desert. The heat is a physical weight. The sun beats down on the steel breastplates of the soldiers, cooking them in their own armor. Coronado is desperate. He has mortgaged his wife's estate to fund this journey. He needs gold. He needs a miracle. In August, he sends a detachment of men led by his most trusted captain, Garcia Lopez de Cardenas, to scout the west. Their indigenous guides, the Hopi, have whispered of a great river that flows through a crack in the world. They speak of it with fear. They call it the place where the sky falls into the earth. Cardenas and his men ride for 20 days. The land becomes jagged, hostile. The vegetation dies away, leaving only red rock and dust. And then the earth simply ends. They stand at the rim of what we now call the Grand Canyon, but they are further downstream, near the border of present-day Nevada and Arizona. They are looking down into the Black Canyon. It is a sight that defies their understanding of geography. The chasm is a mile deep. The walls are sheer, black volcanic rock that seems to absorb the sunlight. Far below, a river winds through the darkness, but to the eyes of Cardenas, the river does not look like water. From this height, it looks like a vein of liquid copper shimmering in the shadows. The guides refuse to go closer. They tell Cardenas that this is the home of the Star Eaters. They say that the river is not water, but the sweat of a sleeping god. Cardenas is a man of the Renaissance. He believes in maps, not monsters. He orders 3 of his strongest men, Captain Melgoza, Juan Galeras, and a soldier whose name has been scrubbed from the official archives, simply known as the Scribe, to descend. They carry ropes, water skins, and arquebuses. They begin the climb down. The descent takes hours. As they climb deeper into the throat of the canyon, the temperature rises. It is not the dry heat of the desert above. It is a humid, metallic heat. The air smells of ozone and sulfur, like the aftermath of a lightning strike. When they reach the riverbank, they realize the scale of the canyon has deceived them. The river is massive, raging with a violence that shakes the ground. But the water is not brown with silt. It is clear, unnaturally clear. And beneath the surface, deep in the channel, there is a glow. A soft, amber light is pulsing from the riverbed. The scribe kneels by the water. He dips his hand in. He pulls it back instantly with a scream. His hand is not burned. It is aged. In the split second that his flesh touched the water, his skin withered, his nephews grew inches, and liver spots appeared on his knuckles. "It is not water," the scribe gasps, clutching his withered hand. "It is time. The river is full of time." They look up at the canyon walls. They are not looking at natural rock formations. Now that they are close, they can see the lines. The walls of the Black Canyon are masonry. They are composed of massive, fused blocks of obsidian and basalt, fitted together with a precision that makes the pyramids of Egypt look like child's play. And there, set into the western wall, is a fissure, a crack in the armor of the canyon. The amber light is spilling out of this fissure. It is a golden radiance, warm and inviting. It looks like the entrance to a vault. "Cibola," Melgosa whispered, "the city of gold." Driven by greed and the delirium of the heat, they entered the fissure. Inside, the laws of acoustics changed. Their footsteps did not echo. The sound was swallowed by the walls. The tunnel leads into a vast, spherical chamber. In the center of the chamber stands a machine. The Spaniards do not have the vocabulary to describe it. To them, it looks like a chaotic altar. It is a column of spinning amber rings suspended in the air by magnetic fields. It hums with a low frequency that resonates in their chest cavities. Thrum, thrum, thrum. The light is not coming from lamps. It is coming from the air itself. The atmosphere in the room is ionized plasma. And embedded in the walls of this chamber are sarcophagi, hundreds of them. They are made of a transparent crystal. Inside them are figures. They are tall, armored in gray metal, and holding weapons that look like spears made of light. They are the Guardians. Galeras approaches the spinning amber rings. He thinks it is gold. He reaches out to touch it with the tip of his sword. The moment the steel touches the energy field, the Chronos Engine reacts. A shockwave of temporal distortion explodes from the machine. It passes through Galeras. In the blink of an eye, Jan Galeras is destroyed. He doesn't explode. He accelerates. His body goes through 10,000 years of aging in a single second. His flesh turns to dust, his bones crumble to chalk, and his steel armor rusts into nothingness. He is erased from history. The scribe and Melgosa are thrown aback against the wall. Then the sarcophagi open. The Guardians do not wake up slowly. They activate instantly. The crystal covers slide back, and 3 of the entities step out. They are 7 feet tall. Their armor is seamless. Their faces are covered by blank reflective visors. They do not speak Spanish. They do not speak at all. They emit a sound, a digital screech that sounds like a modem connecting, amplified to a deafening volume. The scribe fires his arquebus. The lead ball strikes the chest of the lead Guardian and vaporizes on impact. The Guardian raises his hand. The air in front of it shimmers. Melgosa is lifted off the ground by an invisible force. His limbs are pulled apart, not by physical hands, but by gravitational manipulation. He screams as he is unmade. The scribe turns and runs. He sprints back through the tunnel, the amber light chasing him like a physical wave. He hears the heavy, rhythmic footsteps of the Guardians behind him. Clang, clang, clang on the stone floor. He bursts out of the fissure and into the canyon. He scrambles up the rocks, not looking back. He climbs until his fingers bleed, until his lungs burn. When he finally reaches the rim where Cardenas is waiting, he is a broken man. His hair has turned stark white. His skin is gray. He looks 50 years older than he did that morning. He collapses at Cardenas's feet. "Do not go down," he wheezes. "It is not gold. It is a clock. It is a clock that eats men." Cardenas looks down into the canyon. The sun has set. The river is dark, but far below, he can see the amber glow pulsing from the rock. He sees shapes moving in the shadows, large metallic shapes patrolling the river.
He realizes that the legends were wrong. The 7 cities were not cities of wealth. They were power plants, and they are still active. Cardenas orders the retreat. He grabs the scribe and rides back to the main body of the expedition to report to Coronado. When Coronado hears the story, when he sees the withered hand of the scribe and the white hair of a young man, he makes a command decision. He realizes that if the King of Spain finds out about this power, he will try to take it. And if he tries to take it, the Guardians will unleash that time weapon on the world. Europe would be aged to dust. Coronado burns the maps. He kills the indigenous guides who led them there to silence the knowledge. He orders the scribe to be placed in a monastery in Mexico City in solitary confinement, where he spends the rest of his short life drawing circles within circles on the walls of his cell. Coronado returns to Mexico a failure. He tells the king there was nothing but buffalo and mud. He endures the shame of a failed expedition to protect the world from the Black Canyon. But the secret is recorded. The scribe wrote one final letter before he died. He hid it in the binding of a Bible. It detailed the location of the fissure. It detailed the amber energy, and it gave the canyon a name, the Threshold of Chronos. That Bible sat in the archives of the Vatican for 300 years, until 1848, when the United States acquired the territory after the Mexican-American War. The archives were transferred. The Shadow Dossier was opened. The U.S. government knew what was in the canyon. When the explorers like John Wesley Powell went down the river in the 1860s, they weren't exploring. They were re-verifying the coordinates. They were checking to see if the Guardians were still there. They were. And when the Bureau of Reclamation proposed building a dam in the 1920s, they didn't choose the Black Canyon because it was a good place for concrete. They chose it because they needed to bury the fissure. The Hoover Dam is not a generator. It is a sarcophagus. They poured 3 million cubic yards of concrete not to hold back the water, but to plug the hole, to seal the entrance to the Chronos Engine. But concrete cracks, and energy cannot be contained forever. The scribe's journal ended with a warning. The river keeps the machine cool. If the river stops, the time will slip, and the past will eat the future. Today, Lake Mead is drying up. The water levels are dropping to historic lows. The concrete of the dam is exposed to the sun, and deep at the base, near the intake towers, the amber light is beginning to bleed through the cracks again. Coronado didn't find gold. He found the fuse of a bomb that has been ticking for 12,000 years. And we just drained the water that was keeping it stable. This has been a file from the Shadow Dossier. The clock is ticking. To the American public, Major John Wesley Powell is a hero of the frontier, a one-armed Civil War veteran who defied the odds to map the last blank spot on the chart of the United States. We are told that in 1869, Powell and 9 men launched 4 wooden boats into the Green River and rode the Colorado through the Grand Canyon. We are told they battled starvation, rapids, and hostile indigenous tribes. We are told that 3 men deserted the expedition and were killed on the rim, while the rest survived to tell the tale. It is a story of grit and survival, but it is incomplete. The official journals of John Wesley Powell describe the geology, the flora, and the water. They are dry, scientific documents. But there is another journal, a small leather-bound notebook that was never submitted to Congress. It was kept in a lead box in Powell's private study until his death, and then transferred to the deepest vault of the Smithsonian. This is the Shadow Log, and it tells a very different story. It reveals that the Colorado River is not just a waterway carved by erosion, it is a coolant channel. It reveals that the Grand Canyon was not formed by nature alone, but by the collapse of a massive subterranean infrastructure. And it reveals that the 3 men who vanished did not die at the hands of the Shivwits tribe. They were consumed by what they found in the wall. The year is 1869. The expedition is 3 months in. They are deep in the granite gorge of the Grand Canyon. The walls rise a mile above them, shutting out the sun for all but a few hours a day. The mood is black. The men are starving, living on moldy flour and coffee. The boats are leaking. Powell, despite missing his right arm, is the iron will holding them together. But even he is beginning to feel the canyon sickness. It starts on August 24th. The expedition reaches a section of the river that does not appear on any map, not even the vague charts of the Spanish. The rock here changes color. It shifts from red sandstone to a deep, bruising purple black. It's the same black silica found at Mount Rushmore, the same geological anomaly found by Coronado centuries earlier. The shadow log records that at noon, the compasses on the boats died. The needles didn't just spin, they snapped. The magnetic field in this section of the canyon was so intense, it shattered the glass of the instruments. Then came the sound. It wasn't the roar of the rapids. It was a hum, a low, resonant vibration that seemed to come from the water itself. It felt like a heavy bass note played on a church organ, sustained forever. The men stopped rowing. They held their heads. The vibration was affecting their inner ears. They felt vertigo. Then the nosebleed started. One by one, the crew members wiped their faces and found blood. It wasn't a trickle, it was a flow. The capillaries in their sinuses were bursting from the pressure of a sonic weapon. Powell ordered the boats to bank. They pulled onto a narrow sandbar on the north side of the river. The hum was louder here. It made the sand dance on the beach, forming geometric Clodney patterns that shifted and swirled. Powell looked up at the canyon wall. Hidden behind a massive overhang of black rock, obscured from the view of anyone passing quickly, was an archway. It was not a natural cave. It was a perfect parabola, 500 feet high, and it wasn't made of stone. It was made of metal. The material was a dull, matte gray, pitted by thousands of years of erosion, but unmistakably artificial. It looked like a seamless alloy of titanium and lead. The archway was sealed by a massive door, etched with symbols that glowed with a faint amber luminescence. This was the Gate of Chronos, the same fissure Coronado's men found 300 years before, but the river had cut deeper since then, exposing the entire structure. Powell, driven by a scientific curiosity that outweighed his fear, climbed the talus slope toward the gate. He was accompanied by Ora Mulholland, the expedition's cartographer, and his brother, Seneca. As they approached the metal door, the hum intensified. It became a physical barrier, pushing against their chests. Powell wrote in the shadow log that the air tasted like burning copper and lightning. They reached the base of the gate. The metal was warm. Oromel Holland reached out to touch the surface. "Don't!" Powell shouted, sensing the danger. But it was too late. Oromel's hand made contact with the amber light. The reaction was instantaneous. Oromel didn't scream. He froze. His body went rigid, vibrating so fast he appeared to blur. And then the door opened. It didn't swing on hinges. It dilated. The metal spiraled open like the aperture of a camera lens, revealing the interior. It was not a dark cave. It was a blindingly bright corridor. The light inside was not fire. It was the inner sun technology of Agartha. Powell looked inside, and what he saw shattered his understanding of the world. He saw a city, but it wasn't a city of stone. It was a city of machines. Massive, thumping pistons the size of skyscrapers moved in the distance. Gears turned with the weight of mountains. It was a factory, a planetary engine room. And standing in the corridor were the Guardians. They were not the giants of Rushmore. They were the mechanics. Tall, slender entities made of the same gray metal as the door. They didn't have faces. They had
sensors. Oromel Howland was pulled inside. He didn't walk. He was dragged by a magnetic tractor beam. His brother, Seneca, grabbed his legs, trying to pull him back. William Dunn, the third man, rushed to help. But the force was too strong. The gate was feeding. Powell watched in horror as the three men were pulled across the threshold. The moment they crossed the line, they changed. They didn't die. They aged. In seconds, their hair turned white, their skin withered and cracked. Their uniforms turned to dust. The Chronos Engine inside the canyon was leaking temporal radiation. It was accelerating time. Powell realized that if he tried to save them, he would be lost too. He scrambled back, sliding down the slope, clutching his notebook with his one good hand. Behind him, the aperture slammed shut. The amber light vanished. The hum dropped to a low throb. The three men, Oromel Howland, Seneca Howland, and William Dunn, were gone. When Powell returned to the boats, the remaining crew demanded to know what happened. They had seen the flash of light. They had felt the ground shake. Powell lied. He knew that if he told these terrified men that they were floating past the entrance to a machine world that ate people, they would mutiny. They would panic and die in the rapids. He told them that the Howland brothers and Dunn had decided to hike out. He told them they feared the river more than the desert. This is the lie that entered the history books. We are told the three men hiked up to the rim and were killed by the Shivwits tribe. Later, the Shivwits denied this, saying they never saw the men. The bodies were never found. Their clothes were never found. Of course they weren't found. They were dust on the floor of a machine room miles inside the crust. The expedition continued, but Powell was a changed man. He spent the rest of the journey obsessively mapping the river, but not for navigation. He was mapping the hard points, the locations where the hum was loudest. He realized that the Colorado River wasn't just carving the canyon, it was cooling the machine. The water absorbed the heat generated by the subterranean engine. When Powell returned to civilization, he became a celebrity. But he used his fame for a specific purpose. He founded the U.S. Geological Survey. He became the head of the Bureau of Ethnology. Why? Because he needed to control the maps. Powell spent the next 20 years ensuring that the specific location of the metallic archway was erased from every official survey. He redrew the course of the river in his reports. He renamed canyons. He created a cartographic dead zone around the site. He called it Separation Canyon, a fitting name for the place where his men were separated from reality. But Powell did one more thing. He lobbied the government. He spoke in closed sessions to the Department of Interior. He warned them. The water is running too low, Powell told them. The river fluctuates. If the water level drops below the intake of the machine, the cooling stops. If the cooling stops, the engine overheats. And if the engine overheats, the West Coast ceases to exist. He laid the groundwork for the Reclamation Act. He convinced the government that they needed to control the river, not for farming, not for drinking water, but to ensure a steady, regulated flow of coolant over the Black Canyon. This is the secret origin of the Hoover Dam project. When the engineers surveyed the Black Canyon in the 1920s, they found Powell's markers. They found the danger zones he had flagged in the shadow log. They built the dam exactly where Powell told them to. They built it to create Lake Mead, a massive reservoir of water, a backup coolant tank. The Hoover Dam is not just a hydroelectric plant. It is a radiator cap. John Wesley Powell died in 1902. On his deathbed, he was delirious. He didn't speak of his family or his war wounds. He spoke of the hum. "Can you hear it?" he whispered to his nurse. "The gears are grinding. They are hungry." The nurse noted that even in death, Powell's nose began to bleed. The shadow log remains in the Smithsonian, classified Level Ultra. But every year, rafters on the Colorado River report strange things near Separation Canyon. They hear a hum that makes them sick. Their GPS fails. And sometimes they see a flash of amber light high on the canyon wall, where the rock looks just a little too smooth to be natural. Powell was the first to see the gate, but he knew he wouldn't be the last. He knew that one day the river would dry up, the coolant would fail, and the door he saw close in 1869 would open again. And this time, there would be no one to watch it feed.
We celebrate Powell as the conqueror of the canyon. But he didn't conquer it. He escaped it. And he spent the rest of his life trying to make sure that no one else would ever get close enough to knock on that door. This has been a file from the Shadow Dossier. The river runs deep, but the machine runs deeper. The history of the American West is often framed as a struggle between man and nature. We are told that the Colorado River was a wild, untamed beast that flooded farms in California and dried up in Arizona, wreaking havoc on the early settlers. We are told that the Bureau of Reclamation, established at the turn of the 20th century, was created to tame this beast. Their mission, according to the textbooks, was irrigation, water storage, and hydroelectric power. It was a noble endeavor to turn the desert green. But the archives of the Shadow Dossier tell a different story. The Bureau of Reclamation was not formed to water crops. It was formed to manage a crisis. The engineers who surveyed the Colorado River in the 1920s were not looking for dam sites. They were looking for a heat signature. They had inherited the classified journals of John Wesley Powell. They knew about the humming archway in the canyon wall. They knew about the men who had vanished. But by 1922, the situation had changed. The hum was getting louder. The water temperature was rising. The Chronos Engine buried beneath the Black Canyon was overheating. This is the story of the survey that saved the continent. The year is 1922. The world is recovering from the Great War. Technology is accelerating. In Washington, D.C., Secretary of Commerce Herbert Hoover is obsessed with the Colorado River. He pushes for the Colorado River Compact, a legal agreement between 7 states to divide the water rights. Why was the federal government so desperate to regulate a river in the middle of a wasteland? Because they knew the river wasn't just water. It was coolant. The mission falls to Arthur Powell Davis. He is the director of the Reclamation Service and the nephew of the legendary John Wesley Powell. He has lived his life in the shadow of his uncle's secret. He has read the shadow log. He knows that the Colorado River flows over the casing of a machine left by a civilization that predates humanity. In the summer of 1922, Davis leads a survey team into the Black Canyon. This is the border between Nevada and Arizona. It is a hellscape of volcanic rock, jagged cliffs, and temperatures that reach 120 degrees in the shade. To the public, they're measuring flow rates and bedrock depth. To the Shadow Dossier, they are measuring thermodynamics. Davis brings with him a team of specialists. These are not civil engineers. They are geophysicists and experts in early radiation theory. They bring equipment that doesn't exist on the official inventory lists, sensitive magnetometers and thermal probes encased in lead. As they navigate the river on barges, the anomalies begin immediately. The water in the Black Canyon is deep and fast, but in certain sectors, the water behaves impossibly. The river boils. It isn't a turbulence caused by rocks. It is a thermal boil. Giant bubbles of steam rise from the riverbed, bursting on the surface with the smell of ozone and sulfur. The water temperature in these hot spots is near boiling, while 50 feet away, it's freezing cold. Davis orders the barge to hold position over one of these vents. He drops a thermal probe on a steel cable. The cable goes down 200 feet. Then it stops. It hits something hard. Not mud, not rock, metal. The probe sends back a reading that terrifies the scientists. The temperature at the bottom of the river is over 400 degrees, and the radiation levels are spiking. It isn't nuclear radiation as we understand it today. It is chronometric radiation, energy that distorts the flow of time. Davis realizes the terrifying truth. The Chronos Engine, the fusion reactor buried beneath the crust, is leaking. The casing is cracked. The river, which has acted as a natural cooling system for thousands of years, is no longer enough. The engine is running hot. If the reactor goes critical, it won't just be an explosion. It will be a continental destabilization. The energy release would shatter the tectonic plate. California would slide into the sea. The ash cloud would block out the sun for a decade. Davis needs to see the damage. He needs eyes on the target. He orders a dive. In 1922, deep-sea diving is a primitive and dangerous science. They use a Mark V hard hat diving suit, a heavy canvas suit with a copper helmet, supplied by an air hose from the surface. The diver is a man named Silas Kincaid, a distant relative of the explorer who found the Egyptian city in the Grand Canyon. The bloodline of the keepers runs deep. Silas is lowered into the boiling river. The current is vicious. He has to wear lead boots weighing 40 pounds each just to stay upright. As he descends, the light from the surface fades, but the river isn't dark. Below 100 feet, the river glows. A sickly amber light radiates from the floor of the canyon. It illuminates the silt and the fish. But the fish are wrong. They are twisted, mutated, swimming in circles as if their internal navigation is broken. Silas reaches the bottom. He isn't standing on river rock. He's standing on a grid. The floor of the Black Canyon has been paved. Massive, interlocking plates of a gray, seamless metal stretch as far as his lantern can see. It is a heat exchanger, a radiator built on a scale that defies logic. And in the center of the channel, there is a breach. One of the plates has buckled. A fissure glowing with blinding amber light is venting plasma directly into the water. The water around the crack is flashing instantly into steam, creating the bubble seen on the surface. But it is what Silas sees inside the fissure that stops his heart. Through the crack in the armor, he sees movement, massive gears, pistons the size of skyscrapers, a machinery of light and sound grinding away in the dark. The machine is alive, and it's speeding up. Silas reports over the intercom wire. His voice is distorted by the pressure and the magnetic interference. It's not just a reactor, Director. It's an engine. It's trying to turn over. It's trying to start. Suddenly, the hum intensifies. The vibration travels through the water, through the copper helmet, and into Silas's skull. Thrum, thrum, thrum. The heat exchanger flares. A pulse of energy shoots out of the fissure. On the surface, the barge rocks violently. The air hose hisses. "Pull him up," Davis screams. They winch Silas up as fast as the gear allows, but the river is fighting them. A vortex forms over the breach, sucking the water down. The machine is drinking the river. When they get Silas onto the deck, his suit is smoking. The copper helmet is hot to the touch. They wrench the faceplate open. Silas is alive, but he has changed. His eyes are milky white, blinded by the amber light. And his watch, a mechanical pocket watch he kept in the suit, is spinning backwards. He grabs Davis by the collar. "It needs more water," Silas whispers. "It's thirsty. If the river stops, the fire comes." Arthur Powell Davis looks at the smoking river. He looks at the desolate canyon walls. He understands the equation. The Colorado River is erratic. It floods in the spring and trickles in the summer. In a drought year, the water level drops. If the water level drops below the intake of the heat exchanger, the cooling system fails. If the cooling fails, the Chronos engine goes critical. They cannot move the machine. They cannot turn it off. They have to keep it wet. They need a reservoir. They need a massive, deep, permanent tank of water sitting directly on top of the breach to provide constant hydrostatic pressure and thermal regulation. They need a dam. This is the secret origin of the Hoover Dam project. It wasn't about electricity for Los Angeles. It wasn't about watering the lettuce fields of the Imperial Valley. Those were the benefits, the bribes given to the public and the politicians to pay for the project. The primary purpose of the dam was to create Lake Mead. Davis returns to Washington. He meets with Herbert Hoover. He lays the shadow log and Silas's report on the desk. "Mr. Secretary," Davis says, "we aren't building a dam. We are building a radiator cap." Hoover, an engineer himself, understands the gravity of the situation. He looks at the geological surveys. He sees the fault lines that shouldn't be there. He realizes that the American Southwest is sitting on a powder keg. "We have to bury it," Hoover says. "We have to pour enough concrete to seal that canyon forever. And we have to make sure the water never stops flowing." The Boulder Canyon Project Act is pushed through Congress. There is opposition. People say it is too expensive, too dangerous, technically impossible. But Hoover is relentless. he ruthlessly crushes the descent. He knows that the budget is irrelevant when the alternative is the end of the world. The location was shifted. Originally, they planned to build in Boulder Canyon, but the engineers realized Boulder Canyon was too far upstream. The heat exchanger was in Black Canyon. They had to build right on top of the anomaly. The engineering challenges were immense. They had to divert the river through tunnels cut into the canyon walls. When the workers started blasting those tunnels, they found things. They found side chambers filled with artifacts, strange geometric tools made of the gray metal. They found skeletons of the Guardians embedded in the rock. The Bureau of Reclamation created a special unit, the sanitation crew, to deal with these finds. They cleared the tunnels before the regular workers were allowed in. The artifacts were crated up and shipped to the Smithsonian's restricted warehouse. The bodies were incinerated. But the heat was the biggest problem. During the diversion of the riverbed was exposed to the air. The heat exchanger was laid bare to the air. The temperature in the canyon bottom soared to 140 degrees. It wasn't just the sun. The ground was radiating heat. The engineers had to work fast. If the machine was exposed to the air for too long, it would destabilize. They poured the concrete, 3.25 million cubic yards of it, enough to pave a highway from San Francisco to New York City. But they couldn't just pour it in one block. The heat from the chemical reaction of the setting concrete, combined with the heat from the engine below, would have caused the dam to crack and crumble. It would have taken 125 years to cool. So, they invented a cooling system. They embedded 582 miles of 1-inch steel pipes into the concrete blocks. They pumped ice water from a refrigeration plant through the dam to cool the concrete as it set. This was to cure the cement. The Shadow Dossier reveals it was to cool the reactor. Those pipes are still there. They are still active. The Hoover Dam is not a solid block of stone. It is a radiator. It is constantly circulating coolant to keep the foundation from melting. Arthur Powell Davis resigned in 1923, shortly after the project was approved. The official story is a bureaucratic dispute. The truth is, he couldn't handle the pressure. He knew that they were building the largest structure in human history on top of a bomb. Before he left, he wrote a final memo to the chief engineer. It read, "Build it high, build it thick, and pray that the water holds. Because if that lake ever dries up, God help us all." The survey of 1922 changed the course of American history. It turned a wild river into a machine. It transformed the desert. But the secret remains. If you take a tour of the Hoover Dam today, the guides will take you down into the tunnels. You will feel the vibration of the turbines. They will tell you it is the power of the water generating electricity. But if you put your hand against the cold concrete wall in the deepest galleries, you can feel something else. A secondary rhythm. A syncopated beat that doesn't match the turbines. Thrum, thrum, thrum. It is the engine. It is still running. It is grateful for the water, but it is waiting. The drought in the West is not just a climate crisis. As Lake Mead recedes, the pressure on the heat exchanger drops. The cooling efficiency decreases. The engine is getting warmer. The engineer's secret of 1922 was that they bought us time. They put a lid on the volcano, but a lid is only as good as the weight holding it down. And the weight is disappearing, drop by drop. This has been a file from the Shadow Dossier. The dam is holding back more than water. When you stand on the rim of the Hoover Dam and look down at that curved white wall of concrete, you are looking at a marvel of engineering. It is 726 feet tall. It contains 3.25 million cubic yards of concrete, enough to pave a 2-lane highway from San Francisco to New York City. We are told it is a monument to the American spirit, a triumph of the Great Depression where desperate men built a colossus to tame a river. But there is a statistic that the tour guides recite with a somber, rehearsed respect. They tell you that 112 men died during the construction of the dam. They tell you they died from falling rocks, heat exhaustion, and accidents with heavy machinery. They are quick to debunk the urban legend that workers were buried inside the concrete. They explain, with the cold logic of structural engineering, that a human body would create an air pocket, a weak point that would crack the dam. Therefore, they insist, no one is buried in the wall. The Shadow Dossier reveals that this logic is flawed because the premise is wrong. The Hoover Dam wasn't built to hold back water. It was built to hold back a frequency. And to seal a frequency emitted by a subterranean fusion reactor, you don't just need mass. You need a binding agent. You need a biological insulator that can ground the Chronos radiation bleeding up from the Black Canyon. The engineers didn't bury bodies in the dam by accident. They put them there on purpose. The 112 men didn't die from falls. They were the ingredients of the mixture. The year is 1931. The Great Depression has crushed the American economy. Thousands of unemployed men flood into Las Vegas and the makeshift township known as Ragtown. They are starving. They are desperate. They will do anything for $4 a day. This provided the 6 companies, the consortium contracted to build the dam, with an unlimited supply of expendable labor. The project superintendent was Frank Crow, a man known as Hurry Up Crow. History paints him as a hard-driving taskmaster obsessed with schedules. The dossier reveals he was a keeper, a man briefed on the true nature of the anomaly beneath the riverbed. Crow knew the stakes. The Chronos Engine, the alien machine discovered by Coronado and Powell, was overheating. The diversion of the river in 1932 had exposed the reactor casing to the air. The temperature in the canyon floor was rising, not just from the sun, but from the ground. The hum was becoming a scream. The concrete pouring began on June 6, 1933. But immediately, there was a problem. The first buckets of concrete poured over the reactor casing didn't set. They boiled. The radiation from the machine was destabilizing the chemical bonds of the cement. It wouldn't harden. It remained a slurry, bubbling and hissing like acid. Crow consulted the shadow log of John Wesley Powell and the notes from the Smithsonian. He realized that the machine reacted to organic matter. In the ancient texts, the guardians had been sealed in living stone. The reactor required a carbon-based grounding wire to complete the containment circuit. The concrete needed to be inoculated. The first sacrifice happened on a graveyard shift in July. A high scaler, one of the men who dangled from ropes to clear the canyon walls, fell. His name was forgotten by history, but not by the reactor. He fell 500 feet, but he didn't hit the ground. He fell directly into a fresh formwork where a massive block of concrete was being poured. The official protocol would have been to stop the pour, retrieve the body, and start over. Frank Crow gave a different order: keep pouring. The other workers watched in horror as the 8-ton bucket of concrete dumped its load on top of the broken man. But then they saw the reaction. The concrete didn't boil. It didn't crack. As soon as it touched the blood, the slurry catalyzed. It hardened instantly, turning a dark, unbreakable gray. The biological material had absorbed the radiation. The blood cement created a perfect seal. Crow realized the formula. The containment wall required a sacrifice at specific geometric intervals. The deaths that followed were not random. They were calculated. The industrial accidents listed in the official reports aligned perfectly with the key nodes of the dam's construction. When they built the diversion tunnels to reroute the river, men died from carbon monoxide poisoning while driving trucks. In reality, They were driven into hot zones where the reactor's energy was venting. Their bodies, saturated with the temporal radiation, were recovered and processed. They weren't sent to undertakers. They were ground down, bones, flesh, and spirit, into a fine powder. This powder was mixed into the aggregate of the concrete used for the tunnel linings. Then came the falling phase. As the dam wall rose, the need for binding agents increased. The reactor was fighting the weight of the dam. It was vibrating, trying to shake off the concrete shell. To counteract the vibration, the engineers needed more anchors. Men were pushed. Witnesses from the era speak of the Black Shift. This was a work crew that operated only between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., the darkest part of the night. These men would go down into the forms, and fewer would come back up. The foremen claimed they had quit or moved on, but their paychecks were never claimed. These men were fed to the reactor. They were placed in the forms before the pour. Some were dead, some were merely sedated. The concrete was poured over them. The official line about air pockets weakening the dam is scientific truth, but metaphysical lies. The bodies didn't create weak points because they didn't remain bodies. The radiation from the Chronos Engine transmuted them. Under the immense heat and pressure and the specific frequency of the machine, the organic matter calcified instantly. The men didn't rot. They became part of the stone. They became the rebar of the soul. The most horrific incident occurred in 1934 during the construction of the intake towers. These towers are the guardians of the flow, controlling the water that cools the engine. The energy here was wildest. Tools would float in the air. Men would speak in languages they didn't know. To stabilize the towers, a mass grounding was required. A scaffold collapsed. It was blamed on a faulty cable. The Shadow Dossier reveals the cable was cut. 14 men fell into the wet concrete of the intake base. The recovery team was ordered to stand down. The pour continued. 14 souls were fused into the base of the tower in a single night. If you go to the Hoover Dam today and look at the intake towers, you will notice they look like fortresses. They look like tombstones. That is because they are. By 1935, the dam was nearing completion, but the capstone, the final crest of the dam, needed one last seal. It needed to close the loop. This brings us to the tragedy of the Tiernan family. On December 20th, 1922, a surveyor named J.G. Tiernan drowned in the Colorado River while scouting the site. He was officially the first death of the project. On December 20th, 1935, exactly 13 years later to the day, his son, Patrick Tiernan, fell from one of the intake towers. Patrick was the last death of the project. This was not a coincidence. It was a closing of the circle. The father and the son, the Alpha and the Omega. The bloodline had to be completed to lock the seal. Patrick Tiernan didn't just fall. He was working on the trash rack of the intake tower. He was pulled in. Witnesses said it looked like the water grabbed him. He vanished into the concrete tunnel, his body sucked into the cooling system of the engine. He was never found. He became the final ghost in the machine. The construction was finished 2 years ahead of schedule. The press hailed it as a miracle of American efficiency. Hurry Up Crow was a hero. But the workers knew. They called the dam the tomb. After the dam was dedicated by President Roosevelt in September 1935, the strangeness didn't stop.
It just changed. The concrete of the Hoover Dam is still curing. Engineers say it gets harder every year. They say it is because of the chemical composition. The dossier says it is because the blood cement is still reacting. The biological material trapped inside is still interacting with the Chronos radiation, growing a crystalline lattice that is harder than granite. The dam is not just dead stone. It is a semi-living organism, a shell of concrete animated by the souls of 112 men. This explains the Hoover hum. Tourists often feel a strange vibration when they lean against the parapet. They think it is the turbines spinning 400 feet below, but the frequency is wrong. Turbines hum at 60 hertz. The dam hums at a frequency of 7.8 hertz, the Schumann resonance, the heartbeat of the earth, but distorted. It is the sound of the men. They are the guardians now. They are the human shields keeping the Chronos Engine from tearing the canyon apart. And there is the matter of the star map. When the dam was finished, the Norwegian artist Oscar J.W. Hansen was hired to create a monument at the dedication plaza. He designed the famous winged figures of the Republic. But look at the floor beneath the statues. It is a terrazzo map of the stars. Hansen claimed it depicted the alignment of the stars on the day the dam was dedicated, so that future archaeologists could calculate the date. But if you analyze the star map closely, it points to a specific star, Alcyon, the central star of the Pleiades, and the date it marks isn't 1935. Due to the precession of the equinoxes, the map aligns perfectly with a date in the future. Hansen wasn't marking the construction. He was marking the expiration date. He knew that the blood cement would only hold for a certain amount of time. Organic seals degrade. The souls trapped in the wall would eventually fade. The star map is a countdown clock. When the stars align with the terrazzo floor again, the seal will break. The concrete will lose its binding, and the engine beneath the river will wake up. Today, the water in Lake Mead is receding. The pressure on the dam is changing. The concrete is exposed to the sun for the first time in 80 years. Inspectors have found alkali silica reaction in the concrete, a cancer that causes the material to swell and crack from the inside. They are puzzled. They say the aggregate shouldn't be reacting like this. It is reacting because the biology is waking up. The 112 men are trying to get out. The Hoover Dam is a beautiful, white curve in the desert sun. It stops the water. It lights up the city of Las Vegas. But it is also a mass grave. It is a crime scene. And it is the only thing standing between us and the time fire of the ancients. The next time you walk across that wall, remember, you are not walking on concrete. You are walking on a sacrifice. This has been a file from the Shadow Dossier. The cement is dry, but the blood is still wet. If you visit the Hoover Dam today, you will eventually find yourself on the Nevada side, standing in a plaza that feels out of place. It doesn't look like a construction site. It doesn't look like a power plant. It looks like a temple. Rising 30 feet into the air are two winged figures cast in bronze. They look like angels, but they have no faces. They sit upon blocks of black diorite, their wings swept back as if bracing against a cosmic wind. Between them lies a massive terrazzo floor, inlaid with a complex star map that charts the precession of the equinoxes. The official plaque tells you that this monument was created by the Norwegian-born sculptor Oscar J.W. Hansen. It says that the star map depicts the exact alignment of the heavens on the day the dam was dedicated, September 30th, 1935. It's meant to be a gift to the future, a way for astronomers thousands of years from now to calculate the exact date this colossus was built. It's a beautiful sentiment. It is also a diversion. The Shadow Dossier reveals that Oscar Hansen wasn't just a sculptor. He was a chronographer. He was a member of the esoteric order tasked with monitoring the Chronos Engine buried beneath the Black Canyon. He didn't build the monument to record the past. He built it to predict the future. The star map is not a birth certificate. It is a countdown clock. The year is 1935. The concrete of the dam is still curing, generating heat that radiates through the canyon walls. The blood cement has stabilized the reactor casing, but the engineers know it is a temporary fix. They need a monitoring system. They need a way to track the cycles of the machine without relying on fragile electronics that the reactor's radiation would fry. They need stone. They need astronomy. Hansen is brought in by the Bureau of Reclamation. To the public, he is an eccentric artist. To the keepers, he is a genius of celestial mechanics. He understands that the Chronos Engine is not powered by uranium or coal. It is powered by alignment. It draws energy from the gravitational pull of specific celestial bodies. The engine wakes up in cycles. Hansen spends months studying the shadow log of John Wesley Powell and the data from the 1922 survey. He calculates the frequency of the machine's pulses. He realizes that the reactor is synchronized with the wobble of the Earth's axis, the 26,000-year cycle known as the precession of the equinoxes. He designed the terrazzo floor to be a functional instrument. The map shows the position of the North Star, Polaris, but it also shows the position of Vega, the star that will be the North Star in 12,000 years. It charts the path of the dragon, the constellation Draco, which wraps around the celestial pole. Hansen claimed this was to show the date of 1935. But if you look at the angle of the spear in the map, the straight line connecting the flagpole to the star Alcyone in the Pleiades, it doesn't point to 1935. It points to a date in the early 21st century. Specifically, it points to the moment when the water level of Lake Mead drops below the Deadpool line. Hansen knew that the water was the coolant. He knew that climate cycles would eventually dry up the river. He was building a warning system for the people of the future. He was telling us, when the stars look like this and the water is gone, the machine turns on. But the most disturbing part of the monument are the statues themselves, the winged figures of the Republic. Why do they have no faces? Hansen wrote in his private journal, which was confiscated by the War Department after his death, "I cannot carve their faces because they do not have human faces. I have seen the Guardians." Hansen had ventured into the access tunnels during the construction. He had seen the sanitation crew hauling out the remains of the entities found in the rock. He had seen the gray metallic armor of the gatekeepers. The statues are not angels. They are accurate depictions of the pilots of the Chronos Engine. They are seated in a posture of eternal vigilance. Their wings are not feathers. They are heat sinks. They are stabilizers. And they are pointing. If you stand directly between the two statues, you are standing on a focal point. Visitors report strange sensations here. Their watches stop. Their compasses spin. Some people feel a sudden, overwhelming sense of vertigo
as if the ground is transparent and they are falling into the sky. This is because the plaza is built directly over the control node of the dam. Hansen buried something under the terrazzo floor. It wasn't a time capsule with newspapers. It was a tuning fork. He took a rod of the gray metal salvaged from the canyon floor, the same alien alloy found by Kincaid in the Grand Canyon, and embedded it in the concrete beneath the star map. This rod acts as a receiver. It connects the surface of the dam to the reactor deep below. The star map is a circuit board. When the light of the specific stars hits the terrazzo floor at the correct angle, the circuit closes. In 1983, during the massive floods that nearly destroyed the spillways, the water level was too high. The pressure was immense. The reactor began to vibrate. At that moment, a tourist took a photograph of the winged figures at night. When the film was developed, the statues appeared to be glowing. A faint violet aura surrounded the bronze. The tuning fork was vibrating. The monument was trying to vent the excess energy into the atmosphere. But the real danger is not too much water. It is too little. Hansen's map predicts the great drying. It predicts the cycle where the orbital mechanics of the Earth shift the rain patterns away from the west. He knew that the desert would reclaim the river. Look at the terrazzo floor today. It is cracked. The official explanation is thermal expansion. The sun heats the stone, and it cracks. But the cracks are not random. They follow the lines of the constellations. The map is breaking apart because the thing beneath it is pushing up. The Chronos Engine is a terraforming device. It was designed to reset the environment. When it activates, it doesn't just make electricity. It manipulates time. It creates a localized field where entropy is reversed. This is why the bodies in the concrete haven't rotted. This is why the concrete gets harder. The dam is being preserved by the time distortion field of the engine. But if the engine fully wakes up, the field will expand. It will envelop Las Vegas. It will envelop the Southwest. It will revert the land to what it was 12,000 years ago, a lush, prehistoric jungle. But to do that, it has to erase the present. Hansen tried to warn us. He inscribed a message on the granite blocks. It is fitting that the flag of our country should fly here in honor of those men who, inspired by a vision of lonely hills, saw these man-made canyons rise. It sounds patriotic, but analyze the syntax. Man-made canyons rise. He wasn't talking about the dam rising. He was talking about the canyon itself. He knew that the Black Canyon was artificial. He knew it was a machine housing built by the ancients. The star map is a clock ticking down to zero. Hansen died in 1971. He requested to be cremated and his ashes scattered over the canyon. He wanted to be part of the dust that coats the machine. Today, as you walk across that terrazzo floor, you are walking on the display screen of a computer that has been running for eons. The tourists look at their phones, checking the time. They don't realize they are standing on the clock that decides how much time they have left. The water is dropping. The stars are aligning. The bronze angels are waiting. And deep in the concrete, the rod that Hansen buried is beginning to hum. This has been a file from the Shadow Dossier. The time is now. Welcome back to the Shadow Dossier. If you dive deep enough into the dark waters of Lake Mead, past the silt and the darkness, you will find a ghost. Resting on the bottom of the reservoir, perfectly preserved in the cold, oxygen-deprived water, lies a Boeing B-29 Superfortress. It is one of the most advanced bombers of the Second World War, the same model that dropped the atomic bombs on Japan. The National Park Service tells us that this plane crashed on July 21, 1948. They say it was engaged in a high-altitude atmospheric research mission called Project Sunreco. They claim the pilot, Captain Robert Madison, lost depth perception due to the glassy surface of the lake and flew the massive bomber into the water by accident. It is classified as a controlled flight into terrain, a pilot error, a tragic mistake. But the Shadow Dossier asks a simple question. Why was a nuclear-capable bomber, stripped of its defensive turrets but loaded with classified electronic equipment, flying just a few feet above the water in a restricted zone? Why did the crew survive with almost no injuries? And why, for 50 years, did the United States Air Force deny that the plane was even there, refusing to salvage a machine worth millions of dollars? The answer is that the B-29 was not testing the sun. It was testing the water.
It was carrying a payload that did not appear on any manifest, a device known as the Scalar Resonance Emitter. The mission was not to study the atmosphere. It was to fire a directed energy pulse into the depths of Lake Mead, straight into the heart of the Hoover Dam's intake towers, to jumpstart the alien engine buried beneath the concrete. The year is 1948. The Cold War has begun. The Soviet Union is developing its own atomic bomb. The United States military is desperate for an edge. They possess the most powerful weapon on Earth, but they know it is dirty. Nuclear war leaves nothing behind but ash. General Curtis LeMay, the head of the Strategic Air Command, wanted a clean weapon. He wanted the power of the Chronos Engine. The military had inherited the secrets of the Hoover Dam from the Bureau of Reclamation. They knew that the dam was a sarcophagus built to contain a massive subterranean fusion reactor left by the Titans. They knew that the blood cement and the star map were keeping it asleep. But LeMay didn't want it asleep. He wanted to tap it. He wanted to siphon the zero-point energy from the reactor to power a new generation of directed energy weapons. But the engine was dormant. It was in standby mode, kept cool by the crushing weight of the water in Lake Mead. To tap it, they had to wake it up. Just a little. They couldn't drill into the dam. That would breach the containment. They had to wake it up wirelessly. They turned to the research of Nikola Tesla, who had died just 5 years earlier. Tesla had theorized that you could transmit energy through the earth and water using scalar waves, longitudinal waves that penetrate matter without resistance. The plan was audacious. They would fly a B-29 low over the lake. The plane would carry a massive scalar transmitter in its bomb bay. As they passed over the sweet spot, the deep channel directly above the ancient fissure found by Coronado, they would fire a high-frequency pulse into the water. The water would act as a lens. It would focus the energy down to the riverbed, vibrating the casing of the Chronos Engine. The vibration would mimic the wake-up signal of the Titans, tricking the machine into powering up. Once it flared, sensors embedded in the dam would capture the energy surge. It was a cosmic jump-start. On the morning of July 21st, the crew of the B-29 boarded their aircraft at China Lake. There were 5 men. They were told they were testing a new type of sun tracker for missile guidance. They were not told about the device in the bomb bay. The device was a black metal cylinder, roughly the size of a Fat Man bomb, but covered in copper coils and vacuum tubes. It hummed with a sound that made the teeth of the bombardier ache.
Captain Madison guided the plane toward Lake Mead. The weather was perfect. The water was calm. Too calm. It was like a mirror. As they approached the target zone, the Overton arm of the lake, Madison dropped the plane down. They were flying at 250 miles per hour, only 300 feet above the surface. "Target acquired," the bombardier said. He wasn't looking at a visual target. He was looking at a Geiger counter that was picking up the faint radiation bleeding up from the bottom of the lake. "Arm the package," Madison ordered. The bombardier flipped the switch. The scalar emitter in the bay powered up. The effect was instantaneous. The water below the plane changed. It didn't ripple. It turned a dark, bruised violet color. The scalar waves were exciting the molecules of the water, turning the lake itself into a massive antenna. Then, the engine beneath the mud reacted. It didn't wake up slowly. It reacted defensively. The Chronos Engine sensed the intrusion. It sensed the clumsy attempt by primitive mammals to hack its operating system. It fired back. The B-29 didn't hit the water because the pilot couldn't see. It hit the water because gravity grabbed it. The engine emitted a traction field, a localized gravity well designed to pull debris away from its intake vents. The plane, a 40-ton bird of aluminum and steel, was suddenly subjected to 10 Gs of downward force. "I can't pull up," Madison screamed. "The stick is dead." The altimeter spun wildly. The instruments shattered. The plane wasn't falling. It was being sucked down. The B-29 hit the surface of Lake Mead at 190 miles per hour. Usually, a crash at that speed would disintegrate the aircraft. It would tear off the wings and turn the fuselage into confetti. But the scalar field had altered the physics of the water. The surface tension was broken. The plane didn't crash. It skipped. It skipped once, tearing off 3 of its 4 engines, and then settled onto the surface. The fuselage remained largely intact. The tail cone broke off, but the main cabin held. The plane skimmed across the water for a mile before coming to a stop. It began to sink. The crew scrambled out of the escape hatches. They inflated their life rafts. They were alive. They were bruised, terrified, and confused, but they were alive. As they paddled away from the sinking bomber, they looked down into the water. The B-29 was slipping beneath the surface, nose first. But as it sank, the water around it began to glow. A faint amber light pulsed from the deep. The scalar weapon was still active. It was still transmitting. The plane settled on the bottom, 200 feet down. The pressure crushed the cockpit glass, but the bomb bay doors remained closed. The device was trapped inside. The rescue team arrived within hours, but it wasn't a standard search and rescue unit. It was a recovery team from the Atomic Energy Commission. They pulled the crew from the water. They didn't take them to a hospital. They took them to a secure facility in Las Vegas. The men were debriefed for 3 days. They were told that if they ever spoke of the violet water or the gravity well, they would be tried for treason. The official cover story was released immediately. Classified atmospheric research, pilot error, mirror effect. It was neat and tidy. But the military had a problem. They had lost a highly classified weapon sitting on top of the most dangerous object on Earth. They planned a salvage mission. They sent divers down in 1949.
The divers reported that the plane was intact, but they couldn't get close to the bomb bay. Every time they approached the fuselage, their equipment failed. Their airlines crimped, their lights exploded, and they felt the hum. The Chronos engine was resonating with the scalar emitter inside the wreck. It had created a localized time distortion field around the B-29.
One diver reported that his watch spun backwards. Another claimed that when he touched the skin of the aircraft, he saw visions of a city burning in the future. The Navy realized that if they tried to move the plane, the disturbance might fully activate the scalar weapon. If that happened, the feedback loop could crack the dam. It could unleash the water of Lake Mead in a cataclysmic flood that would wipe out everything downriver to Mexico. They made a choice. They left it there. They declared the site a war grave, even though no one had died. They restricted the airspace and the water space. They pretended the plane was lost, even though they knew exactly where it was. For 50 years, the B-29 sat in the dark. The cold, fresh water of the lake preserved the aluminum. It didn't rust. It waited. Then, in the early 2000s, technology changed. Technical divers began to explore the lake using mixed gas rebreathers. They found the plane. The National Park Service was forced to acknowledge it. They opened the site to limited, guided dives, but the rules were strict. Do not touch the aircraft. Do not enter the fuselage. They claimed it was to preserve history. The Shadow Dossier reveals it was to preserve the quarantine. But the situation has changed again. The drought in the west is draining Lake Mead. The water levels are dropping to historic lows. The B-29, once safely hidden in the deep cold, is getting shallower. The pressure is decreasing. The temperature around the wreck is rising. And the scalar weapon inside the bomb bay relies on cold water for containment. Recent sonar scans of the wreck show anomalies. The bomb bay doors, which were shut tight in 1948, are beginning to buckle. A faint, rhythmic pulse is being detected by hydrophones in the lake. The device is waking up. The Lake Mead bomber is not a museum piece. It is a finger on a trigger. General LeMay wanted to jumpstart the engine. He failed, but he left the jumper cables attached. Now, as the water recedes, the circuit is closing. If the water level drops another 50 feet, the wreck will be exposed to the sun. The solar radiation will interact with the scalar coils. The resulting discharge will fire the pulse that was meant for 1948. But the Chronos engine isn't dormant anymore. It is agitated. If that pulse hits the reactor now, in its unstable state, the Hoover Dam won't just crack. It will be unmade. The government knows this. This is why there are new restrictions on the lake. This is why the Deadpool scenarios are treated as national security threats. They aren't worried about water rationing. They are worried about the bomb in the mud. The crash of 1948 was a warning. We tried to hotwire the gods, and they pulled us out of the sky. Now the evidence of our hubris is rising from the deep, ready to finish the mission we started. This has been a file from the Shadow Dossier. The water is hiding the fire, and the water is running out. Here is the comprehensive narrative for The Spillway Crisis, 1983, written as a continuous, immersive script for voiceover. This story reimagines the historic flooding event at the Hoover Dam as a desperate purge of a temporal weapon. Welcome back to the Shadow Dossier. In the summer of 1983, the American Southwest faced a cataclysm. A massive El Niño weather system had dumped record amounts of snow on the Rocky Mountains. When spring arrived, the meltwater came rushing down the Colorado River basin with the force of a tidal wave. Lake Mead, the massive reservoir held back by the Hoover Dam, rose to levels never seen before. The official history books tell us that the Bureau of Reclamation was caught off guard. They tell us that the engineers battled the rising water for weeks, adding plywood boards to the top of the spillway gates in a desperate attempt to gain a few more feet of capacity. They tell us that eventually they had no choice but to open the massive steel drum gates and release the water into the spillway tunnels to prevent the dam from being overtopped. It was a dramatic battle against nature, but it was a lie. The Shadow Dossier reveals that the crisis of 1983 had nothing to do with snowmelt. The water level was rising, yes, but not because of the river. The water was expanding. It was boiling from the bottom up. The Chronos Engine, the ancient fusion reactor buried beneath the Black Canyon, had gone critical. The cooling system, established in 1935, had failed. The engine was overheating, pulsing with a chaotic energy that defied the laws of thermodynamics. The dam wasn't at risk of overflowing. It was at risk of melting. The engineers didn't open the spillways to save the dam from water. They opened them to vent the poison. The year is 1983. Inside the control room of the Hoover Dam, the atmosphere is suffocating. The air conditioning has failed, not because of a mechanical error, but because the ambient temperature of the concrete has risen 20 degrees in 4 hours. The chief engineer, a man named Robert McAllister, is staring at the seismic monitors. He isn't looking at water pressure gauges. He is looking at the vibration readings from the base of the dam. The needle is vibrating so fast it is a blur. The frequency is 7.8 hertz, the heartbeat of the planet. But it is spiking. It's waking up, McAllister whispers to his second-in-command. The cycle is peaking. The reactor is trying to shed its skin. Deep beneath the reservoir, under 500 feet of dark water, the Chronos Engine has activated. The amber light that Coronado saw centuries ago has turned into a violent violet strobe. The energy output is massive. It is heating the water of Lake Mead, causing the molecules to expand. This is why the lake level is rising so fast. It isn't just inflow. The volume of the water is increasing because the density is decreasing. The water is turning into heavy water, charged with temporal radiation. If the heat isn't released, the reactor will crack the tectonic plate. The resulting explosion would not be nuclear. It would be a time dilation event. It would erase the timeline of the entire West Coast. McAllister has only one option. He has to flush the coolant. He has to dump the radioactive, time-charged water out of the lake and send it down the river before it destroys the dam. He orders the spillways open. The spillways at Hoover Dam are not simple slides. They are massive tunnels, 50 feet in diameter, drilled through the solid volcanic rock of the canyon walls. They are designed to handle 200,000 cubic feet of water per second. They had only been used once before, briefly in 1941. They were untested at full capacity. On July 24, 1983, McAllister hits the switch. The massive steel drum gates, weighing 5 million pounds each, roll back. The water of Lake Mead roars into the Arizona and Nevada spillways. But this isn't normal water. To the observers on the rim of the canyon, it looks different. It moves too fast. It has a viscosity that looks like liquid mercury. And it glows. As the water hits the concrete lining of the tunnels, a terrifying phenomenon begins. The official engineering reports from 1983 state that the water caused cavitation. Cavitation is when bubbles form in fast-moving water and implode with explosive force, pitting the concrete.
The reports say the damage was severe, tearing massive holes in the tunnel lining. The Shadow Dossier reveals that cavitation was a cover word for chronal degradation. The water was charged with time distortion particles, or chronotons, bleeding off the overheating engine. When this water hit the concrete, it didn't just chip it, it aged it. Inside the Arizona spillway, the concrete lining was subjected
a million years of entropy in a fraction of a second. The steel rebar rusted into dust instantly. The concrete turned to sand. The massive chunks of debris that were ejected from the tunnel outlet weren't broken, they were fossilized. The water ate through 3 feet of reinforced concrete. Then it ate through the rock. The terrifying sound that echoed through the dam that day was not the roar of a waterfall. It was the sound of the earth screaming as it was forced to age. McAllister watched the telemetry. The sensors in the tunnels were dying, but the heat in the reactor was dropping. The flush was working. The superheated, time-charged water was leaving the system. But they had a new problem. The water exiting the spillways was radioactive with time energy. As it hit the tail race and flowed down the Colorado River, it began to affect the environment. Fishermen downriver reported seeing fish that hatched, grew to old age, and died in the span of minutes. Plants along the riverbank withered and turned to ash as the spray hit them. The river was a stream of accelerated death. The government initiated a localized media blackout. They claimed the restricted access to the river was due to dangerous currents. In reality, they were quarantining the timeline. Inside the dam, the crisis was escalating. The Arizona spillway was disintegrating. The water had eaten a hole so deep it was threatening to undermine the foundation of the intake towers. If the tower collapsed, the dam would lose its structural integrity. McAllister had to make a choice. He couldn't close the gates, the reactor was still too hot, but he couldn't keep them fully open, or the tunnel would collapse. He decided to feather the flow. He pulsed the gates. Open, close, open, close. This created a rhythmic release of pressure. It sounded like a giant breathing. Whoosh, silence. Whoosh, silence. For 3 days, the battle raged. The engineers pumped liquid nitrogen into the internal cooling pipes, the ones installed in 1935, trying to freeze the core from the inside while venting the heat from the top. Finally, on July 30th, the temperature spikes leveled off. The violet light beneath the lake dimmed. The hum of the Chronos Engine faded back to its dormant rhythm. McAllister ordered the gates closed. The silence that fell over the canyon was heavy. The air smelled of ozone and ancient dust. When the engineers were finally able to enter the spillway tunnels to inspect the damage, they were horrified by what they found. The official photos show a massive hole in the concrete, large enough to fit a house. But the photos were doctored. They were black and white, grainy, hiding the true nature of the destruction. The engineers found that the rock beneath the concrete hadn't just been eroded, it had been transmuted. The volcanic tuff had turned into a smooth black glass. The intense temporal friction had vitrified the stone, and embedded in the glass were shadows. During the flush, a maintenance worker named Elias Thorne, no relation to the historian but a member of the same cursed lineage, had been caught on a catwalk near the tunnel vent. He hadn't fallen in, but he had been exposed to the mist. When they found him, he wasn't dead, but he wasn't Elias anymore. He was a statue. His skin had calcified. His clothes had turned to stone. He was frozen in a pose of running, looking back over his shoulder. The time distortion had accelerated his cellular biology until he petrified in the blink of an eye. McAllister ordered the statue removed. It was crated up and sent to the same warehouse in Nevada where the Roswell debris and the Steam Man are kept. The damage to the spillways was catastrophic. The Bureau of Reclamation spent months repairing it. They developed a new way to aerate the water to prevent cavitation. But the repair crews noticed something else. When they tried to pour new concrete into the hole, it wouldn't bond to the black glass. The glass was repelling the material. It was out of phase with current reality. They had to use a special epoxy, a chemical bonding agent derived from the gray metal found by Coronado. Only that alien material could bridge the gap between the timeline of the glass and the timeline of the concrete. The 1983 flood is remembered as a near miss, a triumph of engineering management. The public believes the system worked. But the Shadow Dossier reveals that the engine is not fixed.
It was just vented. The heat is building again. Since 2010, the water levels in Lake Mead have been dropping. Scientists blame drought and climate change. But look at the data. The water isn't just evaporating into the dry desert air. It is disappearing. The Chronos Engine is drinking it. As the reactor wakes up from its slumber, it requires more coolant. It is sucking the water down through microfissures in the riverbed, pulling the lake into the earth to cool its internal core. The bathtub ring around Lake Mead, the white mineral stain that shows where the water used to be, is not just calcium. If you scrape it, you find traces of iridium and isotopic anomalies. The ring is a radiation burn. The spillways crisis in 1983 proved that the machine is volatile. It proved that the dam is not a passive structure. It is a cap on a bottle of lightning. And now, with the water levels so low, the spillways are useless. If the engine overheats again, there is no water to flush. There is no coolant to vent. The next time the Chronos engine goes critical, there will be no flood, there will be fire. The engineers who work in the dam today walk past the sealed access doors to the Arizona spillway. They don't look at them. They know that behind those doors, the tunnel still glows with a faint residual violet light. They know that the rock inside is millions of years older than the rock outside. They check the gauges. They watch the lake level drop. And they pray that the rain comes before the fire does. Because McAllister is gone. The old guard who knew how to pulse the gates is gone. And the machine beneath the Black Canyon is getting thirsty. This has been a file from the Shadow Dossier. Water remembers, and time waits for no man. If you fly over the American Southwest today, you will see a scar on the earth. It is a white band of mineral deposits that wraps around the edges of Lake Mead, bleaching the red rocks. They call it the bathtub ring. It stands over 140 feet high, a stark visual record of how much water has been lost. Turn on the news, and they will tell you this is the result of a 20-year mega drought, the worst in 12 centuries. They will blame climate change, the over-allocation of the Colorado River, and the thirst of cities like Las Vegas and Phoenix. They will tell you it is a crisis of resource management. But the Shadow Dossier reveals that the water isn't just evaporating into the dry desert air. It isn't just being pumped onto golf courses. It is being inhaled. The Chronos Engine, the massive subterranean fusion reactor buried beneath the Black Canyon, is waking up. For 80 years, the weight of the lake kept it dormant, a pressurized lid on a sleeping volcano. But as the 21st century began, the engine's metabolic rate increased. It demanded more coolant. It began to drink the lake from the bottom up. The severe drought in the West is not just a weather pattern. It is the intake cycle of a machine that is preparing to start. The story of the receding waters begins in the year 2000. The new millennium brought a shift in the energetic grid of the planet. The Schumann resonance, the Earth's heartbeat, began to spike. Deep beneath the Hoover Dam, the sensors installed by Oscar Hansen in 1935 registered a change. The vibration of the reactor casing increased from a low thrum to a high-pitched whine. The water levels began to drop. At first, the Bureau of Reclamation attributed it to a dry winter in the Rockies. But the math didn't add up. The inflow from the Colorado River was low, but the outflow from the dam was standard. Yet millions of acre-feet of water were vanishing from the reservoir every year. Where was it going? It was going down. Microfissures had opened in the riverbed, cracking through the blood cement seal poured in the 1930s. The water was being sucked into the cooling jackets of the Chronos engine. The machine was thirsty. By 2010, the lake had dropped over 100 feet. Marinas that had been bustling in the 90s were now stranded on dry land, miles from the water. Boat ramps led to nowhere. The skeletons of sunken boats began to emerge from the mud. But boats weren't the only thing surfacing. In 2015, a fisherman near the Gregorian Basin reported seeing a reef that wasn't on his depth finder. He said the water around his boat began to bubble, and a jagged black spire breached the surface. He motored closer. It wasn't rock. It was obsidian. It was a smooth, glass-like structure, hexagonal in shape, pulsing with a faint heat. He took a picture with his phone. Before he could upload it, his phone bricked. The electromagnetic field around the spire fried the electronics. When he returned to the marina, he was met by park rangers. They confiscated his camera and told him he had seen a volcanic uplift. They closed that section of the lake the next day. This was the first sighting of the Black City. The Black Canyon isn't just a machine housing, it is an urban complex. The ancient civilization that built the engine didn't just leave a reactor, they left a metropolis. As the water recedes, the skyline of this alien city is rising from the deep. In 2022, the situation went critical. The water level dropped to 1,040 feet above sea level. This is dangerously close to the dead pool, the point where the water is too low to flow through the dam's intake towers. As the water got shallower, the phenomena got stranger. On May 1, 2022, a barrel was found in the mud at Hemingway Harbor. Inside were human remains. The media went into a frenzy. They speculated about mob hits from Las Vegas in the 70s. But then a second set of remains was found. Then a third. The police said it was a coincidence. The Shadow Dossier says it was a purge. These bodies weren't all mobsters. Some of them were wearing the tattered remains of uniforms from the 1930s. They were the lost 112, the men sacrificed in the blood cement. As the water pressure decreases, the temporal field that held them in stasis is failing. The dam is spitting them out. And then there are the fresh bodies. In August 2022, a group of scuba divers went missing near the intake towers.
They were technical divers, experienced and equipped. Their bodies were never recovered, but their dive computer data was uploaded to the cloud before they vanished. The data showed that they didn't drown. They were pulled down. At a depth of 200 feet, their descent speed accelerated to 40 miles per hour. They were sucked into an intake vent that shouldn't have been open. The final reading on their computers showed a water temperature of 200 degrees Fahrenheit. They were boiled alive in the coolant flush of the engine. The National Park Service has now closed huge swaths of the lake to swimming and diving. They claim it is because of falling water levels and dangerous debris. The truth is, they are trying to hide the spire. Near the Virgin Basin, the top of the central tower of the Black City has breached the surface. It stands about 10 feet out of the water now. It looks like a black monolith, wet and terrifying. It absorbs radar. It absorbs light. At night, campers on the shore report seeing beams of violet light shooting up from this monolith, connecting with the star cluster of the Pleiades. The Hansen star map is aligning. The connection is being re-established. The drought has also revealed the B-29 bomber that crashed in 1948. For decades, the plane was safe in the deep, cold dark. Now it is in the shallows. Sunlight is hitting the fuselage. The solar radiation is interacting with the dormant scalar weapon still trapped in the bomb bay. Divers who have illegally visited the wreck recently report that the plane is humming. The metal is vibrating. The algae that usually covers the wreck is dying, peeling away to reveal shining aluminum that looks brand new. The time distortion field around the bomber is expanding. The government is panicking. You can see it in their actions. They are rushing to build the third straw, a massive new intake pipe at the very bottom of the lake designed to suck the last dregs of water out to keep Las Vegas alive. They tell us it is for municipal water security. But look at the schematics. The third straw doesn't just go to the water treatment plant. It has a diversion line that goes straight into the bedrock beneath the dam. They are building an emergency coolant loop. They are trying to bypass the river and pump water directly into the core of the Chronos Engine to keep it from exploding. But the water is running out. The Colorado River is dying. The snowpack in the Rockies is shrinking. The engine is drinking faster than nature can replenish. We are seeing the side effects of the engine's awakening in the weather. The heat domes that sit over the west for weeks at a time, that isn't just atmospheric pressure, that is thermal venting from the lithosphere. The ground is heating up the air. And the birds. Just like at Roanoke in 1587, the birds at Lake Mead are dying. Hikers find thousands of dead gulls and grebes along the shoreline. They have no signs of disease. Their hearts just stopped. They flew into the dead zone of the engine's frequency and dropped out of the sky.
The receding waters have exposed something else: the silence of the government. In 2023, the Department of Interior released a plan to cut water allotments to Arizona, Nevada, and California. It was a drastic, unprecedented move. They are willing to let agriculture die. They are willing to let cities ration water. Why? Because every drop of water that goes to a farm is a drop that isn't cooling the bomb. The priority isn't crops. The priority is containment. If the water level drops below 895 feet, the absolute bottom of the dam, the reactor becomes fully exposed. The blood cement will dry out and crack. The seal will break. And then the Black City will rise. The structures surfacing now are just the antennas. The main city is the size of Manhattan. If it decides to surface, it will displace the tectonic plate. The Hoover Dam will shatter like glass. There is a webcam at the Hoover Dam. It runs 24/7. You can watch it online. Sometimes late at night, the feed cuts out. It goes to a technical difficulties screen for an hour or two. The Shadow Dossier has analyzed the frames right before the cut. In the darkness of the canyon, the water isn't black. It is glowing. A swirling amber vortex forms near the intake towers. The engine is testing the locks. The drought is not an accident. It is a countdown. The receding water is a curtain being pulled back to reveal the stage for the final act. We spent a century trying to bury the past under millions of tons of water. But water is patient, and water is finite. The past is dry, and it is hungry, and it is coming up for air. The next time you see that white bathtub ring around the lake, don't think of it as a water level. Think of it as a fuse, and the flame is getting closer to the powder. This has been a file from the Shadow Dossier. The lake is empty, but the tomb is full. We have reached the end of the line. For nearly a century, the Hoover Dam has stood as a monument to human engineering, a massive concrete wedge driven between the cliffs of the Black Canyon to hold back the Colorado River. We were told it was built for electricity. We were told it was built for irrigation. We were told it would last for 1,000 years. But the timeline has accelerated. The water is gone. In the world of hydrology, there is a term that engineers whisper with dread: dead pool. It occurs when the water level in a reservoir drops below the lowest intake pipes. At Hoover Dam, that elevation is 895 feet above sea level. When the water hits this line, gravity can no longer push the river through the penstocks. The turbines stop spinning. The generators go silent. The river dries up. The power grid fails. That is what the textbooks say should happen. That is what the laws of physics dictate. But the Shadow Dossier reveals that the laws of physics do not apply in the Black Canyon. This is the story of the day the water stopped, but the power didn't. This is the story of Protocol Omega. The date is today, or perhaps tomorrow. The timeline is fluid. The water level in Lake Mead has finally breached the critical threshold. The intake towers, those concrete sentinels that have stood underwater for 80 years, are now standing on dry land. They look like tombstones in a dust bowl. The mud around their bases is cracking, revealing the skeletons of the lost 112, the men sacrificed in the blood cement, who are finally exposed to the sun. Inside the control room of the dam, the Bureau of Reclamation engineers are watching the gauges with a mixture of confusion and terror. The flow meters read 0. There is no water entering the turbines. The pipes are filled with air. But the output monitors tell a different story. Turbine number 1 is spinning. Turbine number 2 is spinning. All 17 massive generators in the powerhouse are rotating at maximum velocity. They are humming with a pitch that is higher, sharper, and more violent than anything recorded in the dam's history. The dam is generating 2 gigawatts of power, but it isn't coming from the water.
It is coming from the ground. The Chronos Engine, the ancient fusion reactor buried beneath the foundation, has fully awakened. For decades, it used the river as a coolant. Now, stripped of the water, the core temperature has gone critical. It has switched from standby to active. It is no longer dormant. It is hungry. The turbines are not being turned by hydropower. They are being turned by magnetic induction. The engine below is generating a field so powerful that it is grabbing the massive steel rotors of the generators and spinning them remotely. The dam has ceased to be a power plant. It has become a parasite, feeding off the energy of the monster below to mask the fact that the monster is breaking loose. In Washington, D.C., the signal is received at the Pentagon. The Hoover Desk, a classified monitoring station manned 24 hours a day since 1935, lights up red. The president is briefed. The Deadpool scenario was not supposed to happen for another 50 years, but the drought accelerated the timeline. The star map on the terrazzo floor has aligned. The constellation Perseus is rising in the night sky, and the star Algol, the demon star, is directly overhead. The Agartha protocol is initiated, but this isn't a containment mission anymore. It is a demolition mission. The government initiates Protocol Omega. Protocol Omega is the final failsafe. It is the order to destroy the Hoover Dam. Within hours, the airspace over Nevada and Arizona is shut down. The highway crossing the Mike O'Callahan-Tillman Memorial Bridge is closed. The official story is a structural instability due to seismic activity. They evacuate the tourists. They evacuate the staff. But they don't send in engineers to fix the cracks. They send in the nuclear support teams. Black Hawk helicopters descend into the canyon, landing on the dry riverbed that used to be the bottom of the lake. Men in hazmat suits deploy. They aren't carrying Geiger counters. They are carrying tactical nuclear demolition charges.
The plan is brutal and simple. They cannot turn the engine off. They cannot cool it down. The water is gone. The only option left is to bury it. They intend to detonate the dam and the surrounding canyon walls, dropping billions of tons of rock and concrete onto the reactor. They want to create a geological seal, a mountain of rubble so heavy that the engine will be crushed back into the mantle. As the soldiers drill holes into the base of the dam to plant the nukes, the environment begins to fight back. The Black City, the ancient obsidian metropolis that has been rising from the receding waters, is now fully exposed. The spires tower over the mudflats. They are pulsing with amber light. The mud around the city isn't drying. It is vitrifying. It is turning into glass. The soldiers report distortions in their vision. They look at their watches, and the hands are spinning backward. They look at their comrades, and for a split second, they see them as skeletons. The time distortion field is expanding. The Chronos Engine is leaking the past into the present. One team, drilling into the Arizona spillway, vanishes. Their radio transmission cuts off with a sound that isn't static. It is the sound of a jungle, the sound of prehistoric birds screaming. The engine has opened a window to the Eocene era inside the tunnel, and the men have fallen into it. At the base of the dam, the sanitation crew encounters the Guardians. The sarcophagi that Coronado saw, the ones buried deep in the fissure, have opened. The gray metallic entities emerge from the cracks in the foundation. They are slow, stiff from millennia of sleep, but they are waking up. The soldiers open fire with 50 caliber rounds. The bullets freeze in midair, caught in localized stasis fields generated by the Guardians. Then the bullets drop harmlessly to the ground. The Guardians raise their weapons, staffs of focused sound. The battle for the Hoover Dam has begun. It is a silent war fought in the shadow of the concrete wall. The soldiers are dying, aging to dust in seconds, or reverting to fetal clumps of cells as the Guardians manipulate their biological time. But the real threat is in the sky. Above the dam,
The air begins to shimmer. It isn't heat haze. It is a tear. The Chronos Engine is not just a power source. It is a gateway. It is a stargate designed to connect Earth to the home system of the Titans, the Perseus constellation. A vortex opens above the intake towers. It is a swirling eye of violet and black. It looks like a hurricane made of neon light. Gravity in the canyon reverses. Rocks begin to float. The water remaining in the pipes is sucked upward, spiraling into the sky. The engine is dialing out. It is calling the fleet. If the wormhole stabilizes, it won't just bring ships. It will bring the atmosphere of Perseus. It will terraform the Earth in days. The commander of the Protocol Omega team, General Vance, realizes they are out of time. They haven't placed all the charges. The Guardians are overrunning the perimeter. He makes the call. Fire the primary charge. The primary charge is not a nuke. It is a scalar pulse weapon, the successor to the device carried by the B-29 bomber in 1948. It is located inside the dam itself, built into the generator room. The order is given. The switch is thrown. The scalar pulse fires. It drives a spike of pure disruptive energy straight down into the fissure, directly into the heart of the Chronos engine. The reaction is cataclysmic. The engine screams. It is a sound that shatters glass in Las Vegas 30 miles away. The amber light turns blood red. The wormhole above the dam destabilizes. It wobbles, implodes, and vanishes with a thunderclap that knocks the helicopters out of the sky. The engine shuts down. It crashes. But the backlash is severe. The pulse cracks the dam. A fissure runs up the face of the white concrete wall, from the base to the crest. It is a jagged lightning bolt of a crack. The dam holds, but barely. The structural integrity is compromised. General Vance orders a retreat. They leave the dead where they fell. They leave the equipment. They seal the access tunnels with thermite, melting the doors shut. The government issues a press release. They claim there was a minor earthquake near Boulder City. They claim the crack in the dam is superficial, a result of thermal expansion. They reassure the public that the power grid is safe. But they don't reopen the road. The Mike O'Callaghan Tillman Memorial Bridge remains heavily guarded. The tours are restricted, and the water never comes back. The Chronos engine is damaged, but it isn't dead. It is in a coma. The scalar pulse forced it into a reboot cycle. It will take time to repair itself. How much time? Look at the terrazzo floor. Look at the star map. Hansen didn't just mark the start date, he marked the reset date. The cycle is 26,000 years, but the engine can accelerate it. The Hoover Dam sits there today, a broken tombstone in a dry valley. The intake towers stand like monoliths in the desert. The turbines are silent now, finally. But if you go to the edge of the canyon at night, past the barricades, you can still feel it. The heat coming up from the ground, the vibration in your shoes. And if you look at the bathtub ring, that white scar on the rocks, you realize what it really is. It isn't a water line. It is a blast shadow. It is the mark left by the radiation of the engine as it slowly burned the water away. The dead pool is here. The water is gone. The shield is gone. The only thing keeping the machine from opening the door again is the weight of the concrete and the silence of the desert. Protocol Omega is still active. The nukes are still in the walls, armed and waiting for the next heartbeat. We built a wonder of the world to hide the end of the world, and we are just waiting for the concrete to crumble. This concludes the Shadow Dossier. The dam is breaking, and there is no one left to fix it.